Hey friends, I'm Danny Nesbitt, and welcome back to episode 2 of Designing a Revival Typeface. Just a quick recap. In the first episode, I went ahead and pretty much just set up the font and created a few control characters. And in this episode, we're going to kind of build on that momentum. Now, before I get started and jump into the first characters here, I just wanted to address a couple of the comments, or I guess questions that I had regarding how I set this up. Something I realized when I originally set this up and was streaming this in the first episode was that I really wasn't showing the font info screen. So the question was, how did I go about getting my reference image set up and then choosing the metrics for this typeface? So I'm just going to jump over real quick to the image that I have here. And what you'll notice is I moved this over to the capital H, and this is what I used as my reference point to set up the metrics for the font. If I go ahead and I open up my font info palette here, and I'm jumped over to the masters tab in this, for the most part the metrics are whatever the default that Glyphs comes with. And I'm paying attention to the cap height here in particular. So what I did is I kept scaling my image up here, and if I kind of move this out of the way, you'll notice that my image is scaled up to 4,000%. So rather than chasing down the remaining 10 units to meet the default 700 unit tall cap height in Glyphs, to be honest, I just bumped this down to 690. That way I could keep my nice round 4,000% number, and I didn't feel that 10 units was really that big of a deal. Once I had my cap height set up, then it was just a matter of going back, and in my case, I just used the lowercase n because that's typically a control character. Once I had that positioned, I just went and played around with the X height until I felt that met kind of the shape or the height of the scan here. And then same thing with the ascender too. So if I jump over to the lowercase l, I just kind of did my best to eyeball that. This one's a little bit more difficult to see because something that I did find interesting about record here is that the ascender and the cap heights were pretty close in size. It ends up being about a 15 unit difference between the two. So once you include the overshoot bands here, it does kind of blend together a little bit on screen. But that is effectively how I went ahead and set this up. So hopefully that addresses some of the comments that I got in the comments section. So with that out of the way, I'm actually going to go ahead and we're just going to copy this image here. And the first thing that I want to kind of tackle today is kind of a set of 4 characters. So now that we've got a round character, the O, and the capital, or the lowercase n, I should say, out of the way, one of the next things I like to jump in and take care of is the B, D, P, and Q. Primarily because they're all somewhat similar in design. Granted there will be some differences as we kind of go through this and work through it. But I often feel like that's a really good next step. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of position this. And one thing I will add is that I didn't go and set my descender here. So this is just the default that Glyphs comes with, which is -200. And I think in this case we can actually kind of bump it up a little bit. So it looks like 180 meets the line there. The tough part with this scan, especially being at 4,000%, is it isn't a crisp, clear scan. There's a little bit of, I guess, roughness around the edges. So, I could play with this a little bit. Maybe I go to 185. We'll kind of play with that and see how that works, but I think for now that at least gets us set up here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to type out N and O next to this. So we'll jump in. I think for now I'm just going to grab the stem of the N, and I'm not going to worry about side bearings yet either. This is mostly just getting things into position. And then the next thing that I need to figure out is how the round of the P is going to best be set up here. So my initial thing here is probably going to be to use the O. And if I zoom in a little bit, it looks like at least the right side matches up fairly well with the shape of the O. Obviously the left side does not, so I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to try one thing first, and then if this doesn't work, we'll try something else. But it looks like if I kind of bump this in a little bit, and then just kind of move this over some too. This may not be 100% perfect, but I think it gets us to what I would call a serviceable place. And again, there's some deviation here from the scan. Again, not totally perfect. One other thing that I'm going to do as well is we're just going to double check the fit curve here. So looks like I'm 3 and 4 from the end. So I could double check these. It looks like it was actually pretty close anyway. The thing is, when I was scaling this inward too, I was only scaling from the left side to the right. So things like the width here remain at 68, which according to my dimensions palette is what that should be. The other thing that I'm kind of looking at here is the kind of the weight of this vertical stroke here. And again, that's about 53, 54. I think I'm pretty happy with that. I will add, when I'm designing a neo-grotesque like this, I feel like this is a little bit easier to do. I think serif fonts typically have a little bit more nuance to them, so you might have to play around with that a little bit more. But I think for what we're doing here, this gets us pretty close. So the other thing that I'm kind of looking at here, and I think I see it the most down here, is so this kind of makes more of a stabbing motion into the vertical stem, where by using the O, mine kind of sweeps up a little bit more, and you can see the difference kind of right through here. I am kind of, I guess, fibbing this a little bit. I'm not exactly on my scan here. I am opting kind of more for the technical approach here than anything, but I think there's enough of a difference, I guess if we want to call it that what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and we're going to kind of split off from that O a little bit. And I think I may actually even back it all the way out here. So we may just end up with, there we go. We're just going to end up with the right side of the O. Now my next guess is that maybe I could use some of this part of the N, because that is a similar shape, I guess you would call it. So this probably won't be perfect, and we're going to have to kind of play around with it a little bit. But I'm hoping by reusing some of these parts we can just introduce some consistency to this. Now, obviously this stabs in a little bit high. We need to kind of bring this down a little bit. So what we'll probably do is just go ahead and just kind of play around with this a little bit. And the other thing that I'm just keeping in mind is my measurements, so making sure that my horizontal stress here is still kind of in that 53 range. The other thing that I'm kind of looking at is just kind of the natural curve of this too, making sure that we're not getting any lumps or anything like that. Something that I do, and you may have picked up on this in the first episode, is sometimes I'll actually just kind of redo the curve handles here. And I'm selecting both of these and kind of keeping them related to each other. I've often found that helps me with a smooth curve. But we can kind of play around with that some and see how that goes. And I think just for the sake of getting Glyphs to close this shape so I can see it as a solid form instead of an outline, what I'm going to do for the time being is just go ahead and we're just going to flip this and move this down to the bottom. This is, I'd say, fairly well mirrored So I'm not too worried about focusing on having kind of two separate shapes here, and probably what I'll do is just make sure I have one side good and then flip it and do the other when we get to that point. So one thing I will go ahead and actually flip on here is something I talked about in the previous episode, which is called Super Tool. And if I go through and I just activate that, and I believe this is a free plugin under the plugin manager, this starts to kind of tell a little bit of a story about my curves here. So I can kind of use this comb, I think is what they call it. And I can kind of move my points and kind of get a kind of a smoother transition between the two of those. And for things like the bottom here, I can actually right click and kind of reduce the size of that comb a little bit, so I kind of get a clearer picture of how that's behaving. So if I back out of that, I'm not really worried about the bottom right now, but if I look at the top, I think that's pretty decent. And since we do have the shape of the letter, I'm actually just going to go ahead and take the side bearings from the N and the O and get those in place. So we have NOP on the screen now. I suppose I could put another set of characters to either side of that. And if I go back here, it looks like we're pretty close to the scan. So I think my gut was right that this was fairly well mirrored. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is we're actually going to chop this shape up so we just have the top half remaining. And then what I'll do is we'll just go ahead, rotate that around, and then just move these into place till everything snaps. And if I have those in the right place, which it looks like I'm 1 unit off, I was going to say we'll have the overshoot right where it should be too, but we're 1 away, and we'll just kind of bump that into place. The top looks like that should be fine. So that's kind of where that stands. And the only other thing that I'm looking at here is that I might actually consider a little bit more weight on this bottom one. So I don't know if this is my eye that really does this, but I feel sometimes that I should say, I at least learned this in design school, that sometimes our eyes want a little bit more weight on things that are at the bottom, especially when we have something on top to compare it to. So this may end up being a touch thicker, looks like about 5 points thicker. I think this is just one of those situations where it's an optical illusion of sorts, and we're just doing our best to kind of make that behave. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm kind of moving these points around a little bit as well. I think that can be a little bit more vertical. And then I'm also just paying attention to my fit curve as well. This is, I think, where it kind of starts to break down a little bit in Glyphs. So I might not be using this as much for shapes like this, but this is kind of the part of type design where you also just have to trust your eye too. And I know for some folks that can be kind of difficult, but kind of compare these two and see what we think. So again, because I have a pretty vertical stress on this typeface, we'll try and keep these points as mirrored as we can. But I think that looks pretty decent. It looks like it follows the original shape fairly well. While we're at it, I guess we'll just kind of go ahead and we'll we'll do a little bit of this and see how close a mirrored P gets to the Q. And honestly, even that looks pretty close too. So, the only thing I'm noticing is it does seem like it may be a little bit rounder through this spot. So maybe we kind of go and work on that a little bit. And if I do like this, because these are such similar shapes, I might actually even go and try this on the P again. So reflect what I'm doing here, put it back over on the P, and see if that suits me. I think this one looks actually a little bit smoother. If I turn on Super Tool again, I know I'm not exactly perfect in Super Tool. I think I'm actually okay with that though, and I don't want to lean on that too much. I want to trust my eye a little bit more. So we'll just jump back over here. And I'm going to take the image with 2 so we can kind of compare the scan. I will add 2 because I know somebody usually comments if I'm tracing this. I do know I can set the crop to the layer bounds. Unfortunately, I just never have good luck with that because I also reuse the same image over and over again. So typically what I find is that I'm kind of fighting against glyphs a little bit when it comes to switching from a P to a Q and then trying to figure out the cropping. So if you're wondering why I just kind of keep the whole image, that would be why. So we'll just get that into position. I'm also kind of looking down at the bottom of my screen here as well. And I think that looks pretty good. One other thing we'll do is we'll just make sure that we have the same amount of counter space there, which I think we do. So I think we're looking pretty good on that. We're pretty faithful to the scans. So with those out of the way, we'll just go ahead and we'll bring in the B and the D. And so for this one, rather than mirroring, we're just going to go ahead. Actually, I think what I'm going to try before we get too far is we're going to flip this stem so this notch sits in the corner down here, and then we'll bring this up to the ascender. Make sure to get the side bearings in. Probably should do the same on the Q too. And then for the D, we're going to kind of do a similar thing since we have the Q. This is probably just good habit to get into anyway. That the D and the Q and the B and the P kind of relate a little bit more to each other. For this one, I don't know that it matters so much because these already kind of looked fairly similar. But for fonts that may have a little bit more nuance to the character design, it's just probably a good habit to be in to kind of leverage those relationships between those two character shapes. So take my scan here, we will move it all the way over. Now unfortunately the way I scan this is the B didn't really get a good scan. I'd say that looks serviceable. And if we jump over to the letter D here, say again we're pretty close on that too. So I'll just go ahead and kind of move that out of the way. And if we kind of jump back a little bit, I think that looks pretty good. So I'm as I'm kind of critiquing this in my mind, I'm looking at a few things. So I might be looking at like the negative space here. Does this volume feel the same as this, the same as this, and so on and so forth? The thing about doing a revival is that a lot of this stuff has kind of worked out for me already, especially if it was a font that was well designed. Sometimes you kind of run into an issue where that's not the case. But since I have the O and the B next to each other, if I were just to take the O and kind of push that in, it does lose a little bit on the side here. And I have seen some fonts that kind of push the opposite side out to kind of compensate for that a little bit. And that could be a decision that I make a little bit down the road. But for now, I'm trying to stay somewhat faithful to the original dimensions of the typeface. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And then the other thing that I'm just looking at is my curves here. So again, I know we were kind of looking at the scan and it looked like it matched up fairly well, but even looking in relation to what I drew now, does this curve feel related to this one, to this one, to this one, so on and so forth. But again, it's a typeface that was kind of pre-designed in a sense. We're reviving it, so I'm probably not looking at it with as much of a critical eye as I would if I was designing an original typeface, where of course I'm kind of up to my own skill set and my own sketches, so I might have to work through that a little bit more. The other thing you can do too is if we go down to our preview window here, we do have a little slider here that we can kind of use to blur some of the detail out a little bit on our typeface. And I actually like this approach too, because it kind of helps determine if I have any blobby shapes. And I can kind of move this up a little bit and take a look at this, or if I want to scale it down a little bit more too. And depending on the font, you can kind of adjust it to whatever size you think you need, but I'm not seeing anything overly noticeable. Something I will add in full disclosure is there seems to be kind of a two-part to my critiquing here of my own fonts. There's as I'm actually recording this episode, but there's also as I'm going through and editing this episode and then watching it on YouTube as well, and even catching some of these things then. So if you've ever thought about streaming or starting a YouTube channel for type design, there's a couple perks right there for you. But with that out of the way, I think we can call those characters for now taken care of. So moving on, I'd probably next, I'm trying to design the uppercase and lowercase in unison a little bit, especially with some of these characters that start combining DNA from others. So maybe what I'll do is I'll jump over to the capital D just to get some kind of half and half letters here. So again, we'll go through, we'll set this up. Just gonna lock that image in place. We'll bring in an O and an H, and then we'll just borrow some pieces from these. Now with the D, I know I don't need the entire O. We're not going to be using the left side of that at all, so I'm just going to copy the part that I need, and then we'll go through and kind of sort out how this curves around and connects to the vertical stem. So I think what we'll do, so I need to keep in mind for this one, it looks like it's about 64 or 65, and actually I just noticed I didn't put my units in here for the O, so it looks like I was at 73, and for the smaller one that was 63, so that looks, it's kind of cozy. It's not too many units off the H. I think I might actually adjust this a tiny bit, so let's see, I actually went the wrong way. So I was looking for something a little bit closer to 60, so yeah, even if I did 61, I might actually like that a little bit better. So since I was messing with all that, we're just going to go ahead, grab this, we'll just recopy that over here. And again, this is pretty similar to what we were doing with the lowercase ones. So I think for this, we're going to kind of adjust these two curves a little bit separately and just kind of see where that lands us. So the outer curve is pretty easy because we're just going to want that to bump up against the baseline and the cap height. And I think that was close. Looks like I was 1 unit off up here, so we'll make sure that one's set. And the bottom one is on the baseline, so we're good there. Then what I'll do is I'll go back here, we'll take a look. I'm at 67 right now. And this is where I kind of have to take some things into consideration. So my straight lines here, if I go off the crossbar of the H, is 65, but my thins for my round shapes is at 61. So I think what I might do is actually start at 65 units and just determine if that's the best way to go. Usually it is, but we'll see if that works. So we'll just go ahead and we'll add some additional nodes here. Not quite worried about path direction right now. It does cut that out, but we'll just go ahead, select everything. And all I'm doing is doing the correct path direction, Command-Shift-R. That way it takes care of the overlap there. And then this will just be a matter of getting these nodes into place. So start with these two that snap into the cap height and the baseline. And we'll let these here snap to those. So I'm just moving till I feel it snap or see it snap on screen. And there we go, we have the start of a D. So we'll go ahead and we'll put some side bearings on that. And then the other thing that I'm taking a look here is, so the way I've drawn this is it kind of goes straight and then it does curve rather abruptly. If I look at the scan, it looks like it takes more of a gentler curve here. So the benefit of working with something like a D is that I can just kind of move these curves over a little bit until it mimics that. The other thing that I could do is hold the Option key down and maybe even kind of smooth that out a little bit so it kind of has a gentler transition there. And then the last thing I might do is just take a look at these here for the fit curves. So for this, it looks like it's kind of jumping more towards the middle options here. But again, we got 73 there. I do have 66 here, which does feel too much. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna grab these inner points. I think the case might have been that I was just off, so if I bump that to 560, we're at 65. Now could leave it there. I might even try something a little more. So that's 65 there, 63 there. So kind of moved off a little bit. But I think we can just take these inner shapes, bump them up. So now I've got 64 and 64. Does 1 point make a difference? I don't know that it does, but it makes me feel better. So to be honest, that's kind of why we're doing that. Could try 63 too. If I did 63. There we go. Just confirming my measurements there. And maybe I could be okay with that. Again, this is one of those things that I may come back to and take a look at as we progress. But what I'm looking at right now and what I'm happy with is that it seems like this curve feels pretty consistent. So the only other thing, I might bump this in a touch more. And again, I'm looking at the O and kind of comparing those two. So similar to what I was looking at with the lowercase o, if we just kind of move this in, there is going to be some differences, but again, it's just kind of getting that visual. Actually, I might even widen it out again. So there's going to be pieces where You know, like the D has a couple 90-degree angle corners here, but there's also spots where the O kind of flares out a little bit more, or obviously the O doesn't have a vertical stem either, so it's kind of, we're giving away in some places some volume, but we're making it up in other places too. And again, I'm also sticking with the scans, so I think as we start to build more letters out, we can kind of get a clearer picture if I'm on the right track with this. But again, my focus was just kind of keeping these shapes somewhat consistent with the scans. So I think actually what I'm going to do, we're going to kind of keep these other characters that I've done together, but we're going to jump over to the capital P. So we will unlock that. I'm going to zoom out a touch here. Let's bring that P over to our workspace here. And I think for this, you probably have two choices. You could work off of the O again, the O and the H, and set it up that way, or you could go ahead and use the D again as your starting point. Now the tough part with this is that we're going to be kind of crunching this up a little bit, and I'm already even noticing too that it's going to be a lot narrower. So we'll just go ahead and get these kind of set up. And again, I'm doing the inner and outer curves kind of independently of each other. Make sure that remains at 63. And the reason that I'm scaling this is, at least for the time being, I'm trying to keep my my Bezier handles here at least somewhat consistent with how I originally drew them on the D. So that's what I'm looking at here. And then looks like I need to move this up by 4 units. So that should give me 63 there and 63 there. So this kind of gives us a starting point. Now this looks a bit, I guess, pointier or sharper than the scan, so that's what we'll have to work on, but I had anticipated that might be the case. So at this point, it's just kind of a matter of moving these around and just kind of determining what's a good curve going to be here. And again, I may use my fit curve here just to kind of help me out a little bit. But same as before, we're just kind of looking for a consistent curve or consistent shape. You could use the heat map plugin for this again if you wanted to. The other thing that I'm kind of noticing too is this actually seems to not quite be 73 units wide. And I think it's just because it's a tighter curve. I might not need as much weight on that, so we'll kind of play around with that and just kind of see how that suits us. Doesn't look like the fit curve really has too much more fuss about that. But I'd say that for now that's a pretty serviceable P. So the one thing with designing a revival typeface is you tend to get very close to the original design. And I think this has at least been true for me and the different ones that I've done, is that there are points where you start to disagree a little bit with what the original designer may have done. You know, some of that I think maybe comes down to a matter of taste. I think some of it comes down to, you know, how, I guess, fonts were designed in the past. You know, these days we kind of have different philosophies because we have so many more places that a font needs to work, namely on screens in this case. When Record Gothic was designed, they didn't exactly, you know, have high-resolution computer displays, so that certainly wasn't on the top of their mind. The other thing that I've noticed too sometimes in older typefaces is things like the P tended to kind of ride, I guess, a little bit higher. They almost felt like it was a capital B that just had the lower bowl removed. Nowadays, I think we see the P kind of have that bowl drop down just a touch more. It's kind of maybe the sign of more modern typeface. And I think this is kind of where revivals can start to deviate a little bit, is how much do you stick to that, and how much do you start to think about modern day usage, modern day preferences and tastes. I think that's just something that every type designer kind of has to answer for themselves. But in my case, for now, you've probably noticed a theme here that I'm just sticking to. I'm sticking to the scans for now, and if I decide to go back at a later point and revisit these things, I'm certainly happy to do so. But I think for the time being, this will be fine. So I think what we'll do is we'll jump over to the Q here, since that is pretty close to the O, and then I'll just go through here so I get all my keyboard shortcuts in the right direction. We'll just kind of get this to a place that looks somewhat decent. So for this, I think I was going to try and do this with 4 points. I'm not exactly sure if that's going to work out the way I want, but we'll kind of see where that goes. It looks like this also straightens out there too, so we'll let that kind of happen. I will say I do like the tail on this. I don't know that I like how I'm drawing it necessarily, but what my thought was, and I don't know if I still want to do this or not, but I was debating about putting an extra set of points in there. But even looking at like the actual specimen in front of me too, I'm not exactly sure that would have been the right move. I think the other thing I need to take a look at here is just kind of straightening that out a little bit more. This may just be full of a lot of trial and error. And it is kind of funny how much a tail on a Q can give one fits, but maybe kind of do something like that, move that over a little bit more. So what I'm looking at, that is 68 across. If I can, I'd like to try and get these about the same. That's 68 across. This one is 64. These two are 65, so actually I was pretty close on that. And it does kind of look like that does kind of curve up too on the specimen, so maybe I can be okay with that. I think for now that probably works, and I don't think I did a U yet, so typically when I proof the Q, I guess queen is kind of my go-to word, but I only have the N out of that. I don't have a U. And I guess the tail really doesn't wrap around too much that I need to worry about that. So I would say this is probably a good spot to call this episode. So again, this is kind of where the fun in type design starts for me a little bit, is now that we've got a lot of these basic square and circular shapes, we can start building out other characters, and you really start to see kind of the flavor or the personality of the typeface stand out. In the next episode, as maybe we get a couple more characters here, we'll probably start trying to type out a few more words and play around with that a little bit. I do have some fun little things we can do for that, but I think for the time being, this will be a good place to call it. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, things that you're seeing, feel free to add those to the comment section below. As I started out the episode, you'll definitely know that I'm reading those and paying attention to that, and I certainly do appreciate the feedback. If you're finding this series helpful, make sure to hit that like button, and if you haven't already, make sure that you're subscribing too, so you know when my next episode is coming out. So with all that said, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next episode.